Hey everyone, this is Coach K, and I'm coming to you live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram and YouTube. Well, here I am coming to you with the Games Changers Championship curriculum, and we're doing the Martin Luther King Jr. Strength to Love textbook. We've been learning how to be civil rights justice professionals, how to win the war over inequality. And we are just hoping to stay soldiers in the faith, fight the good fight and be able to prevail in love and not be defeated, to be undefeated champions over the power of self responsibility, social responsibility, and corporate or group social responsibility. So we're on chapter 13. We got 15 chapters, 2 more chapters left, and this is the second thought of Dr. King training and mentorship and coach. He is our spiritual coach or spiritual mentor, and so we're going to hear what he has to say in regards to how to prevail in love. Chapter we're on is chapter 13, the answer to perplexing questions. And we're going to start on section 2. We got, I think we have 4 sections in this opportunity. So let's begin. The second idea for removing evil from the world stipulates that if man waits submissively upon the Lord in his own good time, God alone will redeem the world. Rooted in a pessimistic doctrine of human nature, this idea, which eliminates completely the capability of sinful man to do anything, was prominent in the Reformation, that great spiritual movement which gave birth to the Protestant, what is it? I'm not Protestant concern for moral and spiritual freedom, and served as a necessary corrective for a corrupt and stagnant medieval church. I'm getting ready to yawn. You need to do more breathing exercise. Okay, so now we're going to go and say the doctrines of justification by faith and the priesthood of all believers are towering principles which we as Protestants must forever affirm, but to Reformation doctrine of human nature overstress the corruption of man. The Renaissance was too optimistic and the Reformation was too pessimistic. The former so concentrated on the goodness of man that it overlooked his capacity for evil. The later so concentrated on the wickedness of man that it overlooked his capacity. Okay, capacity to do what? For good. Okay, so he's talking about the capacity to do good, goodwill to men. And so in order for us to understand what he meant by that is that we had these different theories as people are moved by thoughts, moved by principles, moved by values, moved by their environment or their community or their cultural belief system or a thought system or emotional system of what is appropriate behavior. So he is saying that the Reformation was too pessimistic, and then the Renaissance was too optimistic. It wasn't realistic. It wasn't mathematically sound, or both of them. It's almost like having mathematics. One was the addition and one was the subtraction. And they had to kind of match both ideas and communities together to make a melting pot to pull together a mathematical system. So he goes on and says, while rightly affirming the sinfulness of human nature and man's incapacity to save himself. This is a powerful one. We're supposed to be in a place in our culture that we can save ourselves, right? because we are supposed to be socially responsible. If we practiced it long enough, we would have been matured, or we would have built our muscles to be able to save ourselves and save each other. Like the fireman. Fireman goes in because he's been trained, he's been taught, he's been mentored, he's been coached on how to deal with fire. So he goes in and saves people, and then he saves himself. That is the whole ideology of salvation, right? So he goes in and says the Reformation wrongly affirmed that the image of God had been completely erased from man. Okay, so he's now focusing on each discipline. This led to the Calvinistic concept of the total depravity of man and to a resurrection of the terrible idea of infant damnation. So, what does he mean by infinite or infant? Damnation is that he was talking about having the inability to be matured, the inability to be developed in these things. So the skillful was able to capitalize on some of these assets, and then the unskillful was not. Whether it was a strategist, whether it was a craftsman, or a laborer or professional, or whether it was someone, a bystander individual. So he says this led to the Calvinistic concept of total depravity of man and to a resurrection of the terrible idea of infinite damnation. So deprived is human nature, said to the doctrinaire Calvinists, that if a baby dies without baptism, he will burn forever in hell. Certainly, this carries the idea of man's sinfulness too far. Okay, so now they're pressuring children to come into the faith as like an insurance policy, right? You do this baptism at birth, and now you have an insurance policy that you're protected from damnation, because now you've taken your child and put a insurance over them. That's what salvation is kind of considered. It's like an insurance policy that you're protected. You're promised a protection over this life. Okay. So now he says this lopsided Reformation theology has often emphasized, a purely otherworldly religion which stresses the utter hopelessness of this world and calls upon the individual to concentrate on preparing his soul for the world to come. By ignoring the need for social reform, religion is divorced from the mainstream of human life. A pulpit committee listed as the first essential qualification for a new minister. He must preach the true gospel and not talk about social issues. This is a blueprint for a dangerously irrelevant church where people assemble to hear only pious platitudes. So you got to realize that we're talking about a Christianity that came through Catholicism or Constantine. So what does that mean? It came through the era where they was in a Reformation transformation, and so when you built colonization or colonialism, they built it on theft, killing, and destroying. So here you have people that wanted to violate and invade people. This is just a community of people that were very military strategic. And so when they came in as military strategic, they did not have the value for life. They had the values of what? Aggression, values of preservation, self-preservation, or group preservation through aggression. And so when that happens, and they build a religion around that preservation, you're going to have teaching, coaching, mentorship, teaching, training around aggression, not social justice, but what you call family preservation or group preservation, because they came together in a group. And so when Dr. King is talking about social issues. He's talking about a religion that was created to support that structure, to support that reality of military strategists that believed it supported the values of death, the values of murder, the values of killing, the values of stealing, the values of exploitation, the values of oppression, the values of slavery. And so if you think about these things coming into the playing field, you're talking about a community that set up a world system based on these values. And then they built a religion to support those values as the foundation of faith. So when Dr. King started talking about this, then you have to look at the compilation, meaning the collectiveness. So you have 3 collections in this colony, right? You have the colony founders, or the people that were the military strategists, the people that built these things, right? You have their community. And then you have the slavery, the labor force who were slaves. And then you have the immigrants or the first residents. Okay, the first residents was given the name Native American, but the first residents are the sovereign owners or residents of this, or first come first serve type of this world. Now, some people will argue that a lot of the dark skinned first residents were taken and enslaved, as with the Africans that were human trafficked, sex trafficked, violated, and what you call prisoners of war into the relationship of slavery to be bought as property. So you have these 3 communities. And so when Dr. King is talking about 3 communities, he's talking about social issues for which community? He wasn't talking about the community that were founders in their community, their families, and then their buddies and their allies, because they're the ones that structured the whole world around their construction, right? So he's not talking about that. So that church that they developed were supporting, because they had to build a religion, supported their values. They did not believe in social issues because they saw the right and they saw the authority to own slaves and take away from the first residents. So that wasn't the issue. He's talking about the community inside of the slavery. So the slave community, he wasn't talking about the first residents, because at the time, the slave community was the labor force. Those were the people that were forced to build everything, from food, from staples, from everything of life to quality of life. The slaves had to have to do, they were the workforce, right? And they were doing it as not just free labor, but as exploited labor, meaning they were being sexually violated, they were being beaten, literally killed. So this is the things that King was talking about. Dr. King was saying, okay, we cannot focus on them. We have to focus on ourselves. So in ourselves, what is our faith? What is our church? What is our gospel? What is our religion? What is our structure? What is our value? What is our principles? What is it that we're going to raise up as a nation? So if you want to look at it as a slave nation, what are we going to do as a nation? Yes, we are the workforce. Yes, we get it, but we still are decision makers. We are still stakeholders in our family, in our group, in our community as slaves. This is what he was talking about. And inside of that community, they were saying and repeating what the founders were saying, that they were treating each other as if they did not want to help each other. They did not want to get involved with each other. They did not want to uplift each other. They did not to do the things that gave them sovereignty within their own social structure, right? So he was trying to focus on, that's what he was focusing on first. He was not yet talking to the foundation, because if you look at this part right here, he said, by ignoring the need for social reform, religion is divorced from the mainstream of human life. Mainstream. A pulpit committee listed as the first essential qualifications for a new ministry. He must preach the true gospel and not talk about social issues. This is a blueprint for a dangerously irrelevant church where people assemble to hear only pious platitudes, by disregarding the fact that the gospel deals with man's body as well as with his soul. So you got to remember, the labor force was the mainstream, because they were the world affairs. I mean, without the slavery, there was no country, there was no government, there was no civilization, there was nothing. So this whole world was the literal thing that kept Earth alive. So they were considered the mainstream. So he was talking about the preachers of this mainstream was not the council, was not the first president. It was the men and the slaves that were rising up, that were leaders, that were being seen as the beacon of light. So King was basically asking, what are we going to do among ourselves? Well, we are kings, we are queens. As leaders, what are we going to do in our family dynamics? What are we going to do in our decision making among the slave nation, among the work nation, among the labor nation, among us? Because we can't tell them what to do, and we can't tell them what to do, but we can tell ourselves what we need to do. And so he goes on and says, by disregarding the fact that the gospel deals with man's body as well as with his soul, such a one-sided emphasis creates a tragic dichotomy between the sacred and the secular. He was saying we can be a sacred people. We don't have to be in the same likeness or image of our slave owner or our or the resident, because we don't know what they're up to. We know what we're up to. So we don't have to be in their likeness. We could be in our own likeness. We can exceed the quality of life in our own, structure. So, for an example, they were slave nation. He was basically saying, okay, so we're property. So what are we going to do to make this a quality of life with what we have, what we're working with? Let me see what we're working with. Let me see how resourceful can we be. What can we do to take this thing? We don't have to be military strategy, but we gotta be together, unity. We have to be strategy. We have to have our own principles. We have to have our own oneness of something, right? We gotta pick what our values. We gotta pick what our conversation is about. And then he goes on and it says that to be worthy of its New Testament origins, the church must seek to transform both individual lives and the social situation that brings to many people anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. So he was getting mixed relationships into this circle during the civil rights movement. So he wasn't just talking to the slave or the dislocated slave community. In 1950, it's very close. We go talk about 1619 through, 2019, which is 400 years. And 1960 was kind of in the midst of this movement of slavery, human trafficking, sex trafficking, social issues against the population that was considered as property. Like we have to say, they was a buy and sell people, right? This is like no color code. It's just the real deal. face-to-face conversation about what was going on. So when King was talking about the church in the slave community, he wasn't talking about the church in the colonial founding communities, and he wasn't talking about the church in the Native American communities that were not. He was focused on the immediate community that he called the beloved community. Beloved community may pick up people, that was, transformed, that was converted. But he was talking about those that were completely the core of the universe because they were the slaves. Okay. So then he goes on and says, brings to many people anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. So he's saying, okay, now if we do this to ourselves, we put ourselves in it because now we have external people putting us in. Do we need to put ourselves in? We need to be about a different business. And the idea that man expects God to do everything leads inevitably to a callous misuse of prayer. For if God does everything, man then asks him for anything, and God becomes little more than a cosmic bellhop who is summoned for every trivial need. For God is considered so omnipotent and man so powerless that prayer is a substitute for work. And man said to me, I believe in integration, but I know it will not come. You Negroes should stop protesting and start praying. I am certain we need to pray for God's help and guidance in this integration struggle, but we are gravely misled if we think the struggle will be won only by praise. God, who gave us minds for thinking and bodies for working, would defeat his own purpose if he permitted us to obtain through prayer what may come through work and intelligence. Prayer is a marvelous and necessary supplement of our feeble effort, but it is a dangerous supplement. When Moses strove to lead the Israelites to the promised land, he made it clear that he would not do for them what they could do for themselves. And the Lord said unto Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? Okay, so we're going to stop for a second because you got to understand that we have the coaching session. He was saying that you can give fish to people as a way of development, like coaching and mentoring. At the beginning, you can show and demonstrate and show the technique, and then help the person with posturing to make sure they practice good technique. And then repetition, doing it over and over and over, you learn and train to do it yourself. And then when you become self-sufficient in it, your muscle gets stronger, it exceeds strength, and then that's when you become established, and then you become qualified to become, aggressive, meaning skilled, right? Or highly standard, or highly qualified, or highly satisfied. And so King was showing this process that we had to become a nation of our own, that in our sovereign right, we had to learn how to be resourceful, learn how to use what we have, use the techniques that we've learned over the years that are masterful, because we have our own mastery. We have our own excellence. We have our own thought processes because we have to live day by day in extreme conditions. So we have our advancements as well. It's not military, but it's called survival. It's called perseverance. It's called endurance, because we was able to exceed the conditions, the circumstances, the situations we were put into. So we were able to be adaptable, which is a very great talent and skill, and like I said, muscle that we have built as a culture. That is what he was talking about. He said we got to take these skills, these talents, these gifts, and create a operation, systematic operation. Like when you think of business, you think of farmers. And then farmers had to learn how to not just farm, but they had to learn to take their business and make commercialization and build groceries. And then build enterprise, where a network of manufacturers, and then manufacturers took those products and made it label them and put them in a situation where they can last. So you have the farmers, you have the manufacturers, now you have the grocer, then you have the customer service, then you have marketers, salespeople, and now you have this whole industry that sits together and work for what? The betterment of food, of hospitality. Now you got restaurants that was added in the last, which is tourism and hospitality, right? So then you add on to those room and board, clothing, fashion, and then you just build up, right? But he was saying the same thing. Colonialism did the same thing. Now the slave nation. We're going to be a slave nation. We need to build. Okay, so this is the truth. This is a condition so how do we create and build quality of life while they grow up, while they transform, while they learn on their own accord? We need to not wait for them. We need to not wait for God. We need to find a way to mature ourselves like a baby. A baby grows every single day and learns how to walk, run. It has to not back just because of the conditions of the environment. Like lions and bears, the world learns how to instinctively develop and mature in the conditions it was given. But it has to exceed it, transcend it. So that's what he was saying. So with that said, I am going to stop so it's not too long. We still got a little bit left in this book. I dropped off. We have a little bit left of this chapter, and I'm going to have to come back to it so that we can finish it. So we're going to stop at, let me see here. So Moses, wear thy caius and thou unto me, speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. Now, I'm not saying that calling on God for help is not needed. Prayer is needed, because the power of God, the knowledge of God, gives us light and eternal. So we need, the food of God. Now, prayer, meditation, and fasting is the food of God, because God these things are gateways to God, to our Creator, to our source, to the thing that connects us to our spiritual self. And our spiritual self has to grow and develop and mature just like our body. The external self, right? Our ethereal person and our physical person, they got to work together, one. Just like if we look at this colonialism and then the slave nation and then the first nation, these three nations that work together as one, but they have not, because they are conflicted, cultural clash. So same thing with our bodies and our spirit. We have these two entities that has been highly sophisticated and made to become one operation. But it's conflictive right now, because the mortal self has its own issues, and then the internal self, which is the ethereal self, spirit, has its own issues. So when you do the fasting, training, meditation, you are the gateway of feeding the food with this ethereal body, because the knowledge of God. That means the communion of God, where God speaks to you, where God says to you one-on-one. It knows face to face, like he did off the service, face to face. That when I'm having communication, a mom-dad relationship, or if you don't have a good relationship with your dad, it's that communication goes back and forth and feeds, whether it's a role model that you look up. This is what we do. The one that created our body and our spirit, right? So that is food for our spirit, and then it matures, and then it builds spiritual muscle, and then it becomes developed enough to be masterful, like the martial arts practices and beliefs. It becomes strong enough to do what it needs to do on a spirit as a matured, advanced being. Then you got on the other side the human body, where you see athletes that train their body, their muscles, and you see what happened to the slave nation. They were trained all day to work and to live a certain routine, a certain lifestyle. Same thing with the body. They take the ether. They have 2 different lifestyles, 2 different foods, 2 different outcomes. Okay? Now, one day, according to prophecy, these 2 outcomes will become one outcome, and they will have one destination, and then they will work simultaneously together, like the way we have seen the world appear. They work together, and we have law enforcement, you have the restaurant industry, you have the entertainment industry. Now they're learning how to be markets that are monopolized, work together, competitive, cooperative instead of competitive, and do partnership, do things that give them their own identity, their own competitive edge, but yet does not eliminate themselves, right? This is a whole nother dynamic we don't have time to talk about, but I wanted to touch base on it because people wonder, how does that help me as in everyday people? Like, I don't do none of this big stuff. I don't interact. So this is how it works with you. What are your goals? What are your values? What are your principles? Where is your destination? What are you going to do from point A to point B? This part right here, where do you go from here? And then you start constructing these things, and that's called the quality of life. And let's say you don't have that much to work with. So now you got to elevate it. A lot of chefs, cooks say, how do you elevate ingredients? You just don't throw it in a pot and then eat them. You got people that strategically master the ingredients and the heat and the water and all the elements together to masterfully make something very tasteful, right? Exceeds the natural taste. And that's what we're talking about: the spiritual life, the physical life, the social life, and all the elements of internal and external life. And then pulling it together, we call it the holistic life. King was talking about that for the slave community. He wasn't able to talk about that with the colonial founders community or the Native Americans community. Even though he was talking about multiculturalism, he was centering it from the slave perspective, the slave nation perspective, because his community had social issues. They were a oppressed group. They were fighting day and night to survive, to live. The basics of life was taken away from them, and they were fighting to keep the basics of life. But they didn't have any weapons. They didn't have capital. They didn't have the resources to fight a traditional fight, just like King David. He didn't have an armor. He didn't have weapons to fight the good fight. He had to use a slingshot, cloth, and skills that God had given him. And this is where we come in as people. We may not have the resources to accomplish these goals, but we do have our own resources that we have been given in our own right that we should use, and we should transcend and excel in that. And so with the slingshot mind ideology, we should use that resource. Whatever that resource is, we need to use it and to exceed it and to be the betterment and good of our society. Not because we're kind, loving people, but because love prevails over all things. That's the dominant, the superior trait of all traits. So if you're going to withstand time, you build from good material. Don't build from straw if it's going to, be flammable. You build from rock because it's a stronger material. Same thing. love is a stronger material than hate, but hate is used predominantly, and some odd reason we are convinced it is the better strategy because we have been deceived, misled, and misguided over time by seeing the high mortality, the death, the hormone, pain, suffering, the tormenting that love has been the diamond, has been hidden. Even though we know diamond is a stronger material, it's definitely a hidden material that people don't know about. If you didn't know about it, you would think the straw was stronger, the mud was stronger, but the rock, regardless if it's hidden or exposed. So that's where we're at. Use love, learn to excel in love, learn to mature in love, learn skillful in love where you can prevail. Become an undefeated game changer champion. This is Coach K signing off. One love, much love, all love. Peace and blessings to you, your household, your tribe, your world. Thank you for joining me.